and welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast, listed in 2020 as number 8 of 42 best podcasts for every sales professional. I am your host, Janice B. Gordon, the customer growth expert and author of Business Evolution, Creating Growth in a Rapidly Changing World. I created Scale Your Sales framework to develop leading edge capabilities to secure, retain, and grow key customer relationships for long-term value and partnership. Join me each week to learn from amazing B2B sales and business experts and influencers. Tune in for actionable insights and strategies. Are you ready to scale your sales?
Hello, welcome to the 99th episode. I've had so many insightful conversations, too many to mention. But before I start, I must admit failure. Now I understand why podcast hosts do series or seasons. So I will attempt to take chunks of 12 episodes and highlight just one. But I know I'm going to fail because there's so many insightful conversations that I want to mention. The first was the launch episode with Timothy Hughes, a good friend of mine and author of best-selling book, Social Selling. He's ranked the most influential social selling person in the world. Little did I know way back in September 2019, that Scale Your Sales podcast would be listed as the 20 best strategic sales podcasts and also awarded over 2 years. So we were 8th out of 44. Now we're 9th out of 43. Best podcasts every sales professional should listen to. So listen up. This is really a thank you to the amazing guests who have so generously shared their experience, their stories, and their strategies. Now, I know I've learned a great deal from my guests. From the listeners reading their reviews, I know the audience has too. So Timothy said that people who adapt best are those that understand the concept of networks. And this really rung true, especially as we've been negotiating over the last 16 months, this global pandemic, and not actually able to meet face-to-face. Networks have been so important. I must mention CEO Stephen Kelly talking about why companies must be customer obsessed. And I love what he said about his wife, but you'll have to listen to episode 8 to find out more. Let's jump a bit to episode 24, Tiffani Bova, talking about her book, Growth IQ, and giving lots of examples of companies that have developed modern and relevant business growth strategies. Now, I agree with Tiffani, who said the act of selling must develop the feeling of personalization and trust. Customers must feel this when they engage at any level. And the tip of this is sales, whether offline or online. I could not agree with Tiffani more. And the Scale Your Sales framework helps B2B companies to reimagine revenue growth through customer excellence and sales. So this is what she was talking about, the tip of sales. Now, Tiffani advises to go ask your customers, what is the one thing that you are not doing? What can you do more of? And these are great questions to ask your customers. When I work with clients, I often ask them, once we've identified their most valued customers, their higher value customer, when was the last time you had the conversation, not about sales, not about the products, but really about the service of what you deliver? So then I spoke to Adrian Swinscoe, a customer experience specialist. Now, many of the people that I interview, I've been following or I've known them for about 10 years. So it's really great to platform great people. But the great thing about the podcast as well is that I meet new people. So Adrian, I've known for a number of years, and I've got his fantastic, beautifully designed book, CX Punk. Now, I interviewed Adrian just as COVID-19 had hit the world, and we'd been in lockdown for about a month. Now, you do not necessarily have to ask customers help specifically, he said. You must tell the customer what's going on and that you're working hard to resume service. But right now, this is service unusual, he said. Adrian gives an excellent example of how banks, and I'm sure some of you had suffered this, banks have frustrated their customers by not communicating effectively. COVID-19 has shined a light on what good customer experience looks like and doesn't look like. What we're seeing is the best companies just know it and just get it, and everybody else is far, far behind, he said. Adrian shares great stories, and one of which was particularly memorable for me, was Zappos. So you're going to have to listen to episode 31 to find out more about that brilliant story that he retold. Adrian says, and I absolutely agree, sales is a massive part of what happens that makes your customer experience. So sales is an integral part, and this is why I absolutely marry the two. You cannot have one without the other. Great sales comes from great customer experiences. Now, Laurie Richardson has worked and continues to work literally to change the face of B2B sales as president of Women Sales Pro. She observes out of a room of 70, this is the story she tells, 70 sales professionals. So she often does lots of engagements and speaking. There are only 4 women. Only 4 women in a group of 70. And her forthcoming book, She Sells, really explores why this is and what we need to do. I mean, really, it's 2001. This should not be happening. So in episode 45, Laurie quotes Gartner's research that's chief revenue officers and companies think that the balance of gender is okay, which goes against really the statistics that she's observing and has been widely quoted. There's been 17% women sales leaders, and it hasn't increased a great deal, and that is an incredibly low figure. So people still need a compelling reason to make an effort to improve those stats to get more women in sales. And in the Scale Your Sales podcast, we talk about this an awful lot. The platform of Scale Your Sales podcast platforms 50% women in sales and 20% ethnic minorities. Now, because we need to hear a breadth of views and experience, and this is what we want to platform on the podcast. So just as the sales industry must modernize to represent the diversity of the audience of the global buyers that they approach and want to engage, so does this podcast. We continue to ask the diversity question and garner a breadth of views. So I hope you really enjoy that. So Laurie mentioned Jill Konrath, as did many of the inspirational role models that I have interviewed. Her name just kept coming up. So I was absolutely honored to interview Jill Konrath in episode 53 of Scale Your Sales podcast. Jill said, diversity in sales still sucks. I love her. She's a straight talker. I absolutely love that about her. And she's the one that's been really leading the charge. So if she's saying that it still sucks, we really need to listen up. Jill recalls that she was a federal government mandated diversity hire in Xerox when she moved from teaching into sales. Xerox, she said, didn't think women could sell technical things like copiers. Within a couple of years of hiring women, 8 out of the top 10 sales reps were minority and females. 8 out of the top 10. That is amazing within 2 years. So they learned how to look for characteristics that were totally different to men. And that's the problem, is that companies are not looking for characteristics that are totally different to men. And then if they did that, then they would recruit more women and you'd have more women in leadership. So Gartner research states that women tend to perform at higher levels. They stay longer, so you don't have to recruit as often, train or onboard, and you hope that this all works out. This is what Jill quoted. So there's a huge business case for women in sales. This is why we talk about it a lot, but not only women, also ethnic minorities. The more familiar you become with your customers, the greater your success rate is, because you speak their language, says Jill. We focus on what matters to them. You'll be able to ask questions that are highly relevant and of interest to them. The goal is to increase your effectiveness, which means you're always learning. So Jill's a real advocate of lifelong learning. She very much promotes that. 6 months into the pandemic, Jill, when we talked, Jill said in our interview, top sales leaders right now must focus on their culture, to be in touch with their people regularly, and to talk human talk. This is opposed to talking about how many calls did you make this week? And I've been in sales. Yeah, we all know that question. Let's talk about your numbers and where you're at. No, this is not what we need to be talking about, but be interested as a human being, says Jill, because you want them to be successful and to ask. Instead, you need to ask, tell me about how you're feeling right now. How can I help you? And I actually think this is what Jill said when we're in the grip of the pandemic, but actually this is something we need to go forward and continue to do, because the world has changed. And then I interviewed Jennifer Warawa. This is in episode 57. She is the Chief Commercial Officer of DIRT, Environmental Solutions. Now, I've known Jennifer for years, way back. Well, it's not so long ago, really. She was in senior leadership team for Sage, and worked with Sage in America for many, many years before moving over to DIRT. Now, Jennifer had been in her role for 1 year when I spoke to her, but 6 months of that year was during the COVID lockdown. So I asked her how the company had adapted to the changes, and Jennifer talked very much about some surprising opportunities that the pandemic had surfaced. She said it's a very different environment. You've had to balance moving the business forward as COO, and also to continually check in and seeing where people are at. The heartbeat of the business, she said, was the factories. She said we manufacture, and we can't develop a product. That if we can't manufacture, we can't develop the product. So safety is absolutely top priority. So she said that they used to do lots of factory tours all the time. Clients used to fly in to Calgary, Alberta. So instead, they had to flip it into virtual and created virtual experience tours anywhere. And DIRT experience centers opened up in New York and Chicago. So it meant that they could offer their customers many more experiences. And that was a real opportunity for people to virtually from anywhere in the world be able to access many more experiences. I love what DIRT stands for, which is doing it right this time. One time only, always doing it right. I love that. It's so great when culture, this is what Jill was talking about, culture becomes part of your DNA. So absolutely great company, and they do really exciting things. So take a look at DIRT. So then in episode 63, we've got so much to cover. We're only halfway through, but it's so exciting. I really wanted to highlight my highlights of Scale Your Sales podcast. So episode 63, four-time sales leader Julie Mann, she said that almost opportunities should be 40% of your sales revenue if you systemize it. So she went on to elaborate, what she meant by this. So Julie said, we spend much of our effort trying to figure out who is our buyer. We find that they're interested. We find we're talking to the decision maker. Maybe we have meaningful conversations with them, but for whatever reason, they end up not buying. So we've just isolated, she said, a needle in a haystack. And we basically throw back the pile into the haystack and try and find a different needle. This is crazy, she said. Using nurture tactics where someone's an almost opportunity, she said, but maybe the timing isn't right or the budget isn't right at that time. Instead, keep that group of people together and just be human, she said. I totally understand this. So things you would say is, I understand it wasn't a great fit for you today, but I'm curious so that I can learn better. People are more often likely to give you information. What did we, what do you think, how did we lose out? What did the other company that won do better? If the other company won, often it's no decision. Just really investigate what went on there, just for my learning. That's what you need to say, because people are more willing to be honest with you. So you start to build a relationship based on trust with someone and you continue to check in with them in a thoughtful way. Things like, I thought of you because we talked about, and you had previously talked about a very specific thing, and I wanted to send this specific thing that was informational or connection or whatever it may, your way. So you're telling them, I'm continuing to think about you. People love to buy from people, she said, that they not only trust, but also take a genuine interest in trying to help them personally, rather than you've got a pain point, I've got a solution. I absolutely love what Julie said. I'd love to mention Malcolm McDonald, my marketing professor when I did my executive MBA at Cranfield School of Management many years ago now. I was absolutely astonished by Malcolm McDonald many years ago, and he continues to blow my mind. He's an author, and he's the author I hold most books for on my bookshelf. I mean, I think I've got about 5 of his books. I know when you listen to this episode 78, your mind will be blown too. Things like, if you don't know the basics of marketing, social media is not going to work. This is what Malcolm said. Also, he said, only 5% of organizations have got financially qualified value propositions. And this is absolutely key. Now, in COVID, you often have the COVID committee, and they're looking for reasons why not. Gartner and have also said in their research that, most deals lose out to indecision, no decision, status quo. So, unless you have financially qualified value propositions, demonstrating return on investment, you're not going to go anywhere. But only 5% of organizations, this is mind-blowing. Sales are made by the way, this is what Malcolm says, you relate to your customer and market. And that's really interesting. That's kind of thought-provoking. Sales are made by the way you relate to your customer relationship. This is why we focus on that in Scale Your Sales framework, the way you relate to your customers and market. Please listen to episode 78. He's going to blow your mind with the golden nuggets of real-world insights. When I worked as a customer experience consultant, I enjoyed the creative thinking practice to innovation and creativity. And since this time, I've gone on to read more about clean language, using metaphors, and I do that an awful lot in my mentoring and my work that I've continued to do with Cranfield School of Management, but also systems thinking and systems modeling. Absolutely love this, really interesting. I was absolutely delighted to interview Bryan Mattimore, author of 3 seminal works in the field of creative thinking, including Idea Stormers and 21 Days to a Big Idea. So I interviewed him in episode 84. Bryan talked about the creative thinking techniques that help to improve the chances of making a sale. Wow. And it gave wonderful examples of the work he's done with various clients in order to up their sales. Now, he talked about why clients, buyers, are a critical part of the creative process. Now, I talk a lot about sales is about co-creation. So you need the buyer and you as a salesperson sitting at a table co-creating the solution. So this really speaks to what Bryan was talking about as well. Now, and it's also about how he was talking about how easy and economic data is nowadays, and gave a few avenues where you can access data relatively economically, and why it's absolutely critical for sales and how it can help your sales. So make sure you go and you listen to episode 84. Episode 85. I know I'm not keeping to, choosing one person every 12, but there's so many. In episode 85 with Anita Nielsen, the sales sensei, in martial art, this means teacher. She's author of Beat the Bot. Now, Anita, we had a great conversation. It was really like she was just sitting across the table and we were having a wrap. So many great things came out of that conversation. I look forward to having her on again. But in episode 85, Anita talked about why we must not leave the humanity out of the sales role. There's a lot of talk about sales in data, and yes, that's important. This is why her book is called Beat the Bots. You've got to keep the humanity in sales, saying that at the end of the day, we are human beings from humans, selling to humans, teaching humans. So never let go of the fact that it's a human business. On diversity, Anita asks, how are non-diverse sales organizations going to be successful being personable with diverse buyers? So if you're not diverse as an organization, how can you provide the diversity that buyers are actually looking for? That she states that she has teenagers in the house. We had lots of fun conversations around that. She says they've got zero tolerance, zero patience for a lack of diversity. It's like, really? This is what the world is like? For them, it's so simple. But what it means, as we had discussed, is that, future employers, unless they are walking the walk and talking the talk, the top talent, these young millennials and Generation Y, they're not really going to be interested in you as an organization. So you really need to get on board now. So I thought that was really interesting perspective from Anita, and something for us all to take on board. So as we start to negotiate what is now new normal as we're coming out of post-pandemic, I talked to Meridith, Elliott, Powell, and this was coincided with the launch of her book Thrive, Turning Uncertainty to Competitive Advantage. Now, I talked to Meridith at the beginning of launching the podcast, and she talked about uncertainty. So it's great to actually have her on again. Now she has the book. In this episode 90, Meridith gives an abundance of case studies of companies that she had researched for her book in Thrive. These companies had thrived for over 100 years. So they'd been through many economic and viral challenges like the pandemic, thinking of the Spanish flu, which is much worse than what we've been through in the last 18 months. So they survived all of that. So there's something to learn from these organizations. What were the essential strategies? And she identified 9 and went through all 9. So you've got to listen to this episode. And it was things like, why, if you're not focused on the vision, then you will always be pulled into the obstacles. Really fascinating. Why competition is needs to become collaboration. And like the principles of Scale Your Sales framework, one of the 9 strategies including, rather than chasing new business, you should focus on your existing customers. And that's the core to Scale Your Sales framework. Retention, existing customers, and growing from there. So you'll notice I've really struggled to mention just one episode in every 12, but I've tried my best. So I hope you've enjoyed a lot of the golden nuggets that I've mentioned. All you have to do is go back in and make sure that you listen to the ones that you've missed, and make sure you subscribe to Scale Your Sales podcast, because I am honored and lucky to have amazing people. Last but not least is Zafer Karaca, VP of Cloud Red Hat Strategies at IBM. His primary focus to optimize IBM's go-to-market strategy. I had to copy all of the video timestamps. Every statement Zafer made was a light bulb for me. It was absolutely fascinating listening to his story. So like this one, the moment we say we're going to control the innovation, it means we're killing it. Light bulb moment. Fantastic. The real value of salespeople is to help customers understand their pain points from a business perspective. We often do pain point solution, but from a business perspective, it's a different skill set that's required now. The advantage of being in a virtual world is the ability to better understand the customer's culture. So how important the culture of the customer is. Zafer said, you can't run a global organization unless you bring diversity in at all levels. And IBM, and this is why he said IBM removed college degree pre-entry requirements from many of the entry jobs, because it was blocking diverse hires. For a long-term growth creation, an ecosystem you have to have an ecosystem that is open to partnership. So I thought this is incredible. Now, remember, I started with Timothy Hughes talking about adaptation and networks and how important that was. So I'm kind of closing this rundown of the last 100 or 99 episodes of Scale Your Sales podcast, and bringing it back round when Zafer talked about, for long-term growth creation, an ecosystem, networks, ecosystem has to be open to partnerships. So I absolutely love what Zafer said. I loved his journey and his story. Now, you've got to go and check out episode 93 and let me know whether you also had many light bulb moments from Safesh. Now, I look forward to you following me on LinkedIn and commenting and letting me know which was your favorite episode of Scale Your Sales podcast. Please, please, please share the love with your colleagues and friends, or just share this episode with them so they can decide which ones they want to go back and get more details and listen to. I am so grateful to all of the followers of Scale Your Sales podcasts. Please do listen, rate, and review Scale Your Sales podcast on Apple iTunes. It makes a massive difference to me, and it helps other people to find Scale Your Sales podcasts. And, you know, I get amazing guests, and they share their experience, their stories, and their insights to help you, the listeners and followers of this show. So it's great if you could help by sharing that with more people. But if you like to watch, then I also subscribe to my YouTube channel. And it means that you'll get the video version of the Scale Your Sales podcast show, which is captioned videos. You'll get that every week when it launches. So thank you so much for following us and listening to us. I hope you've all left a review on Apple iTunes. Please do share the podcast, and I look forward to the next 100 of amazing guests and insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Scale Your Sales. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, Janice B. Gordon, to comment and share. I'd love it if you would leave a review on ratethispodcast.com/scaleyoursales. Please subscribe for more weekly expert insights to scale your sales.